Welcome to the Multicultural Mindset broadcast. Your host is Dr. Laverne H. Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlook, Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Multicultural Mindset. I believe in providing mental health and educational and behavioral health services to Black, Indigenous, and people of color in ways that are relevant, culturally relevant, and in ways that represent cultural humility. Not so much with the cultural competence, because we're not trying to learn about people. We are trying to engage and connect and see people in all their glory for who they are, their history. And that's what the multicultural mindset is all about. And today I am so pleased to be able to talk with a distinguished scholar, researcher on issues related to men, paternal mental health, and fatherhood. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Tyce Nadrich. Dr. Nadrich is a counselor educator. He is a professional counselor, a supervisor, a consultant. He is the coordinator of clinical training at Balance Mental Health Counseling in Huntington, New York. And his research interests specifically include racially ambiguous and multiracial mental health and parental mental health, with a very strong concentration on paternal mental health, men, and fatherhood specifically. He is published in multiple peer-reviewed journals and book chapters on mental health and counselor education, and has obviously facilitated many presentations because of that knowledge at conferences all over the world. So, Dr. Nadrich, thank you so much for being with me this morning and for being willing to share from the wealth of knowledge that you have on these topics of men's health, father's mental health, and the considerations that providers often overlook or
Hmm.
don't think about, things that perhaps men don't even think about and overlook. So let me just first say welcome to the multicultural mindset.
I'm happy to be here. You make me sound busy. So I don't know. I don't like that.
Well, I'm glad to have you. I just want to talk for during our time today about this issue of Black men's mental health, fatherhood issues, challenges. How did you become interested in this topic?
No, I appreciate that question. It it started with me becoming a father, if I'm being honest. My first child, I have two children. My first child was born in June of 2020. And as you mentioned, while I'm not currently based out of New York, I was in New York. So just put yourself in your mindset in terms of what it meant to be in New York, just outside of New York City, but still connected with and very much through New York City in June of 2020, going through gestation, all of the isolation, all of the fear. And it was around that time that shortly after my daughter was born, my first child, my daughter, it I felt it. Like I was just like, this is I didn't expect to feel whatever this is that I'm feeling, this mix of emotions, odd emotions, sad emotions. Like there was a lot going on there. And I didn't expect to feel that. And I didn't know what to do with it because no one had told me like, hey, this thing you're about to do, like this is gonna be interesting. This is gonna be hard. This is gonna be difficult. And that's on top of the fact that it was peak COVID times as well. So my interest spurred from there. I'll also add that a dear friend and mentor of mine, who I believe you're going to be connecting with soon, he focused on fatherhood as well. And while we had different focuses within the fatherhood umbrella, connecting with him, working with him, loving him has also in that's like sort of also those two things connecting, becoming a father, his research area in fatherhood, him and I working together and publishing together through his work on fatherhood, it all just sort of coincided. And I had to ask more questions about fatherhood, specifically early fatherhood, this idea of that period, from trying to gestating to postpartum, like that was where it was really like, I don't think we know, I don't think we're asking what fathers' experiences are during this
Wow.
time. And that was like, I want to know that. That's where it really started.
I appreciate the fact that this is coming from your personal experience in part. I know not in
Mhm.
total, but in part, and that was influential in you trying because you were trying to make sense of your own experience. And so much of our best work comes when we're trying to make sense of our own experience. Thank you for sharing that. What do we need to know about
Mm,
men's mental health, about fathers' mental health?
mm.
What do we need to know?
To start, that there is such a thing as father's mental health. Let's be clear about that. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, if I'm being honest. Like, I think we all know, like men, dads, of course, there's mental health. I also think that there's a culture specifically of and about men that we suppress these things, that we compartmentalize these things. I think that's a broad narrative. I also think there's a special thing happening during pregnancy, gestation, and postpartum because men are conditioned. One, broadly, men are conditioned to sort of just push it downward. We have so many things about masculinity, about what it means to be tough and what it means to be masculine. And I want to be clear, there's generations where I think that some of this is changing on a broader level, but I think those narratives still persist. There's a lot of that that's still there. During the pregnancy process, during the birthing process, during the postpartum process, I think men are told directly and indirectly, it's not about you right now.
Hmm.
It's about your partner. It's about the person who is carrying and feeding and birthing that baby. And that is very true. I want to be very clear. There's a lot going on there that is not going on with us. And I always say this, in my clinical work, I say, and, not
And
but.
not but.
No, not but. And how you doing, man? Like, tell me about you, because, and this is anecdotal, but this is also somewhat in the research as well. But in my clinical experience, when we say, "And how are you?" It says, "I'm good, man. Let's focus on her. I'm all
Mm,
right, man. She was up last night with X, Y, Z, or she's feeling this."
mm,
That there's not much space for that and either because socially we have boxed that and out or we've conditioned men to not think about the and because we're pushing it down and we're going to focus on her. And to some degree, perhaps even partners and mothers and fathers and siblings and birthing women also are saying, no, it's about me right now. I think it's a messy spot because yes, it needs to be about you. You are doing something amazing and fantastic and something that I literally cannot do, and it affects me too.
yes.
And what I often say to my clients and because it affects me, it also affects you. I might be jumping ahead to where the conversation goes, but
No, go
when I do
ahead. I
this work,
love
yeah,
this.
when I do work with my clients, I work a lot with couples who are either preparing for a birthing experience or postpartum birthing experience and adjusting to what it means to bring that baby home. And I often tell partners, I'm like, so let's just be clear here. When your partner is all pissy and frustrated, right? Do you feel that? And they go, yeah, I feel that. Does it affect you? Yeah, it affects me. Okay. So if your partner, in this case, let's talk about men, if the father in this dynamic is struggling to figure out what it means to be a dad, what my role is in this spot. What does it mean for how am I supposed to show up as a father? If they are struggling, do you feel that? And the answer is almost always yes, I feel that. And these are the emotional responses that I have to that. Okay. How can
Yeah.
we address what you're going through, what baby is going through, and what dad is going through as well?
Yeah. And you're right, because we focus on because the woman has the physical labor
Mhm.
because she's sharing the body, sharing her body with the baby. We do focus everything, pretty much everything, on how she's doing. And we think of her physical health first, and then we also think of her
Yep.
emotional and mental health.
Hmm.
But because there's not the physical carrying in the from the paternal side,
Yeah.
we do dismiss that. And shame on us for doing that. Now, I imagine that because of the way Black men are socialized, I mean, many men are socialized to have the
Hmm.
hard exterior, but we understand that men of color have so much additional pressure, and there's so much going on there that that level of vulnerability to say, I'm scared
Hmm.
out of my wits. That's not gonna be, it's not a response I've ever heard.
Mm. Good.
So, what do we say to men of color? What do you say to men of color that makes it safe, that invites them to really talk? Like, is there anything that you find that gives them the, oh, so glad you asked.
Yeah. Yeah, I share this story when I've talked about this topic. I share this story often, and I'll end it with a direct question that I've asked, and that I usually almost always ask. Um, I was working with this couple who they were maybe 9 or 10 months postpartum. It was, their situation was they literally had their kid most of the time in the session. We were hanging out because that's what it had to be. We need to go to counseling, and we don't have anybody to take care of this baby, so we're gonna bring this baby. And I was like, cool, bring this baby. I'll hold the baby if I need to. So we're gonna get this work done. Um, and I remember when we were doing our intake. It's probably early on because I remember the kid was still in a car seat. Um, and as I'm going through the questions and I'm asking the questions that I think need to be asked, especially for postpartum, I look at mom in the situation as a heterosexual couple. So I look at mom and I go, like, how was pregnancy? How was gestation for you? And she talks about this and, had some tough spots and some medical complications and all that. And I looked at the dad and I say, how was pregnancy and gestation for you? And he literally looked at me and he looked around trying to figure out who I was talking to. And I'm looking at him like, yeah, you. And he looks at me, he goes, no one's ever asked me that question before. I said, well, I'm glad that I asked. So my point in sharing that story is I think to start, we should acknowledge that men are part of this process. And I do think we do that sometimes. And I think sometimes when it comes to exactly what you're saying, the medical side, the emotional side, all of that, I don't think we take the time to check in with folks about that. And there's a variety of reasons. I want to be very clear. Medically, physically, yes, this is exclusively within the birthing parent. This is exclusively within the person who carries the pregnancy. Emotionally, that's everybody. That's all. That's
Yeah.
everyone involved. That's not just mom and dad. That's grandparents. That's everyone who is involved. There is an emotional process happening, and I don't
Yes.
think we acknowledge that. And I'm a firm believer. I want to be very clear. I don't believe in taking anything away from mothers in this moment. I genuinely believe we have enough that we can ask both people. We can talk to both people. I think we have enough resources to do that. I'm not convinced we've always had the will to do that. I don't think the
Mm,
culture was there to do that. And that's not me
hmm
pointing the finger at anybody. I think the culture, how
hmm
we perceived masculinity and pregnancy, that just wasn't
hmm
where we were. I
hmm
think we can do better now. So going back to your initial question is I would just start by asking the questions that are relevant to both parents to ask them to both parents. And in my intakes, when I meet with couples, I say, how was trying for both of you? How
mm,
was the trying process? And I go for you and for you because you might find, and this is something that I hear a lot. It's also in my research, but it's clinically as well. The trying process is an interesting time for some men,
hmm hmm
especially if it doesn't go as immediately and smoothly as some of us think it does, but in
hmm
actuality, statistically, it almost never does.
Yeah,
People,
true.
yeah, people don't realize the dominant narrative about getting pregnant is much easier and cleaner than the actual statistical narratives of getting
Mm,
pregnant. A lot of people believe, and I think the social narrative is the moment you start having unprotected sex, you're gonna get pregnant. And for most people, that is absolutely not the case. Um, what I tell clients that you should be trying for about a year before you even think about okay, is there something else going on here in terms of infertility or things
Mm-hmm.
that baffles people that
Mm-hmm.
no, a year is actually like 6 months to a year is normal.
It's normal. Mm-hmm.
So asking fathers the same questions. How is trying for you? How is the process for you? How is pregnancy and gestation for you? How is birthing for you? How is postpartum? How has it been having a newborn, a toddler?
Yeah.
How is it for you?
Yeah.
These are the types
Yeah.
of questions we ask mothers all the time. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying we should not ask them. We absolutely should ask them. But
Yes.
we should also
No, I
ask
hear you.
fathers
Yeah, I
who
hear
are
you. Not
involved.
taking anything away from the the mother's role, experience, changes, adjustments, physical, but like you said, both people, everyone in the family is affected, is impacted. We don't often think about that. So, what are some important considerations about the fatherhood journey?
Yeah. So I'll start with stats in general, and this is a little bit of a dated stat. I actually didn't pull the date when I was pulling up. I think it's 2021 or something like that. But the
Okay.
best report we have is somewhere between 8 and 10% of fathers report some form of mental health difficulties around the fatherhood transition period, which is that part where we're
Mm,
becoming a father. My hunch here is that's an underreporting. Because
mm,
of this, that's just my hunch. I'm not taking to the
mm-hmm,
bank, but my
mm-hmm,
hunch is that's an underreport because, like we know with certain situations, that societal pressure to report a certain way can influence things. And my hunch here is that men are societally pressured to underreport feelings of sadness or anxiety or frustration. I'll say certain emotions are probably much easier or are much more socially acceptable to report. But in terms of considerations, right, we have to start by recognizing that some fathers do experience some difficulty in terms of that fatherhood transition. And when we think about those difficulties, we want to think about the emotional experience. And sometimes that includes the repression or suppression of emotions. We want to think
mm,
about that literal family reorganization and transition. Things
mm,
are changing significantly, usually. And
mm-hmm,
as we go through those first couple of months into that, 9, 10 month window of gestation, the
mm-hmm,
physical changes might be negligible for the father in this dynamic. They're significant for the
mm-hmm,
mother around that time,
mm-hmm,
but they might be negligible for the father. And the moment that birth happens, now the physical changes in the environment, in the home, in operations, and in daily living, those are changing. So, how do we talk about family reorganization and family transition? How do we talk about
mm,
fatherhood identity development? And that's a big one because we carry scripts and narratives about who we're supposed to be and how we are supposed to be. And sometimes there's those things about, and I usually do this in with my clients, certainly as they get a little bit deeper into their parenthood journey, is my hunch is that they're carrying narratives about usually who they were going to be and who they're not going to be. And it's usually well, I'm not going to be like my mom or dad. I'm never going to do this thing right here. And then a couple of years in, you'd be like, I sound just like them. Good Lord. There's an identity development process that's happening that is informed by what we're bringing in, our pre-existing scripts, what we believe fatherhood is supposed to be, what we've learned fatherhood's supposed to be, what we're seeing fatherhood is as we get older and meet other fathers. There's so much that goes into this. And then there's the reality, what it means to be a father. And sometimes those things are in conflict. Sometimes those don't things do not line up. And again, we know this about mothers. We have open conversations with this about mothers. The fatherhood process is similar but unique. So, how do we have these conversations about identity development? Within that, related to that, is how do we have conversations about social expectations and in the way that society, fatherhood, and ideas about masculinity intersect?
mm,
Because sometimes being a father, certainly being the father the way that some fathers want to be, requires tasks and labors that are sometimes a bit in conflict with traditional ideas about masculinity. Now, in
mm-hmm,
some ways, and I want to be clear, I'm not one who pathologizes masculinity broadly. I think that there are aspects of all of our identities and social norms and roles that can likely be beneficial and likely be harmful depending on what their relationship is with masculinity. what their circles and their immediate circles, their families, their society, their community, and how they perceive masculinity and how the person perceives masculinity and how that intersects with what it means to be a father. All of those things intersect. I'll share a brief personal story. I'm reflecting on when my daughter was born. So my daughter, I'm sure someone listening to this may empathize with. Sleep was not a thing. She didn't do that. Like that was just not. She wasn't having it. Like sleeping was just like, no, I'm not doing that. That she literally slept in two situations. Number one, actively nursing. If she was actively nursing, she would fall right asleep. And number two was if I had her in a stroller outside moving nonstop. Like the
Huh.
moment you stop, it was a problem. So you got to move, move, move. So it would be
Wow.
part of my early fatherhood was first off, my wife needed to sleep, like because she couldn't sleep. Actively nursing, sleeping, she never actually slept that way because she was so scared that she was going to roll over and hurt her or something like that, which is a reasonable fear. So we would have this system where it would be nursing, 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 and as soon as she started to fall asleep, grab this baby, throw her in the stroller, and just out the door immediately.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And what that meant for me, though, was I would be walking around my neighborhood, pushing a stroller for maybe 2 hours if we were really lucky. Because that's the hope. She was very young, but
Yeah. Trying to get her to sleep for a couple hours.
and let my wife sleep for a couple hours because she's not sleeping. So it's both of them, right? It's both. Let's let everybody get some restful sleep. The my Some people that I grew up with was like, oh, so you just walking around for like 2 hours and da 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 da. Like you can just leave her there. And I'm just like, but that societal response of
Mm.
because the underlying
Why are you
question
doing
is
that?
exactly. That's the underlying question is why are you doing that? Are you supposed to be doing that? Is that what a
Mm.
man is
It's
supposed to be
supposed to do.
doing? And that type of stuff, those type of pressures are real.
Yeah.
And the last sort of thing I'll put in there in terms of considerations and things is help-seeking behaviors and the deprioritization of one's own needs at
Mm.
times. Because in my experience and in research, that oftentimes men are inclined to deprioritize their own needs because the physical labor is not theirs. Gestation is not their labor. Birthing is not their labor. If the mother in this case is literally able to nurse, nursing or chooses to nurse, nursing is not their labor. So it's not about me. I'm not the one who needs things right now.
Mhm.
She's going through it, right? And there's
Mhm.
that deprioritization of needs, whether I have something or not, and that affects help-seeking behaviors. Because if I deprioritize my needs, I'm not going to seek help. I'm not going to ask for help. I'm not going to reach out to anyone and say, "Hey, I'm struggling here. I'm having a hard time," because it's not about me. It's about her and it's about the baby.
And it also affects emotional availability and emotional sensitivity to what the mom
Yes.
does need, but
Mhm.
the emotional vulnerability where you're suppressing where you're really at and what your needs are. So if you're not taking care of your needs, how fully available will you be to respond to the person who you have determined to be the center of attention here, which is
Yeah.
mom and baby?
And that's how and why most of the couples that I work with land hanging out with me, which is we feel distant. We feel disconnected. Even though we are doing this thing successfully, effectively, that this baby is alive and thriving and fed and we're good, there's something missing here. We are not connected. And I want to be clear, I'm not putting that entirely on the fathers and saying it's all their suppression of, it's not that. It's a dynamic. But has the environment to for him to feel comfortable and say, having a real hard time with this. Does that environment exist? And that's an intentional act to foster that environment from both sides. Yes, it requires fathers in this situation to have the sense of the awareness and the insight to be able to say to themselves, all right, I'm not feeling right, and I try to say something, but it also requires a sense of comfort and safety within the
Yes,
relationship to say, I
yes.
can say this and I won't be called the pejorative or questioned about what I'm supposed to be doing or told it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about me because I'm the postpartum. That safety has to be there. So it's a dynamic. It's always a dynamic. And that's why I ground all of my work all of my writings about fatherhood, I always ground it in and because
And
both of these things, all of
yes,
these things are probably true.
yes, yes. Expectations
Mhm.
versus experience.
Yes.
When I talk about anger,
Mm.
oftentimes anger is really about an expectation that was far different from the experience.
Hmm.
I'm thinking that that concept really applies here, and that when you're talking to fathers or fathers to be, it might be important to really talk about the expectation they have so that if that expectation is, well, just a little unrealistic,
Yeah.
they have the chance to consider what the reality might be. Or on the other end, if the reality is different than the expectation, go back and talk about what were your expectations.
Yeah. Listen, we're on, I agree with you 100%. We're on the same page here because as I'm even thinking about what do we do, right? This
Mhm.
is something that's true in the research, in the study that I'm currently conducting about fathers. There's something that's coming up a bit in the research. And if I'm being candid, this is true in my own personal experiences of fatherhood. Certainly with my first child, I think I came with better expectations from a second. But I hear it in the research that I'm conducting, and I also hear it with my clients that it's not uncommon for fathers to recognize, okay, we're gestating right now. This is not my time to shine. But the moment that baby comes out, it's game time. I'm on. Like I'm gonna scoop that baby up. And sometimes I'll say, especially if we're nursing, that baby don't want nothing to do with you for a little while. It's not about you, fam. Like that's not it. And that's not an assault on you. That is something different. You cannot
That's a
nurse like
different
that.
process.
There's a
Yes.
different process. And what does it mean when you were thinking, well, I just spent 8 to 10 months on the sidelines being helper, being supporter, thinking that once birth happened, I would step up. I could take the lead every now and again, but I'm actually still stuck in support role. Like I'm
Yeah.
actually still on the sidelines right now, and my job is still to support mom in this situation,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
take the lead, not do the feedings and do everything. No, I'm still secondary.
And people, dads, I think especially, and it's not, again, I'm not faulting anyone, but with that hope of connecting with that child as soon as that
Mhm.
child is born. I have spoken with fathers of 1 year olds, even 18-month-year olds, 2 year olds, who were saying, my child still doesn't connect with me. They always want their mommy. I'm here too. Why? And they feel a sense of rejection. And I have to say, well, there's a connection there that they have. And the important thing for you is be present in the ways that you can. I have to try to say, she's 1 or she's 6 months. She's not rejecting you. It's not, it's not rejection, but it really feels that way. And that really is, as we're
Mhm.
talking, I think that really is about the expectation that
Yes.
the baby would respond to the father in the same way that the baby responds to the mother. Well, kids don't respond to both parents the same at any time, whether they're
Ever.
1 day old or whether they're 40 years old. They don't respond to
Yes.
both parents in the same way. They have different relationships. When you're working with men with dads to be, do you find that they are looking for the TV dad kind of
Mm.
situation
I
to
think it
happen?
varies. Yeah, I think it
Okay.
varies. I think all men that I've worked with and that I've encountered are seeking connection. I think the degree in which they can verbalize or visualize what that connection looks like is sometimes varied. Think there's a feeling inside that they all want, though, is to feel wanted, relevant, part of the process, connected and intertwined. And that might look very different. Like, we all find satisfaction within our roles in very, very different ways. But I think the desire of feeling relevant and needed and wanted is fairly consistent. Now, is that sometimes I'm gonna go out there and make all this money so you can stay home and do everything that you want and need to do, and I'm providing that. Yes, that could be it.
Mhm.
Is it also, I'm painting a false binary here, but like on the other side of this, is it also want to make sure that I am doing feedings and doing changings and soothing and doing doctor's appointments. Also, I want to be present for it all. And I want to be an equal part, or maybe I even want to take the lead. I often say with my clients, I like who's lead right now. Like sometimes, because as you were mentioning, kids sometimes vacillate between who they are going to in general, but also with very specific things. And this is something that we learned about the parenthood journey is that
Mhm.
sometimes what happens is kids will vacillate between parent A is a lead now, like that's the person I go to for everything. That's the person I listen to, and I'm gonna
Yeah,
ignore everything parent B says, and then I
yeah,
might swap and go, I'm gonna listen to you, I'm gonna go to
yeah,
you, and I'm gonna ignore this one over
yeah,
here. And then
yeah.
what's really starts to manifest over time, usually, is kids start to go put their certain needs to this parent, certain needs to that parent as the default. It doesn't mean they can't go to
Hmm.
both, but if they fall and get physically hurt, they might go to one person. If they have a
Hmm.
complex cognitive question that they're working out, they might go to
Hmm.
another person. Those
Hmm.
roles start to emerge.
Yeah.
And I often tell parents that's kind of no different than adulthood if you think about it, because my hunch is that as a grown person, you probably take your problems or your issues to certain people and not others because this
Mm.
one is always going to be the wrong kind of help. In fact, their helpfulness is if I ask them this question, whatever they say, that's probably what I'm not going to do.
Not gonna
Right?
do.
Yeah. It's like but we do that as adults. We take our concerns and our needs in certain directions.
Hmm. Hmm.
So kids will usually do that as well. But regardless, we're going back to fathers. I think they're all seeking to feel
Yeah,
connected and part of this unit. They just
yeah,
might be seeking it in different ways. And
yeah.
that's where the dynamic and the communication comes in is what does it mean to be a relevant, contributing member of this family? Does your ideas about what it means to be relevant and contributing does it match your partner's ideas about
Mm,
what they need and what they're asking for, right?
mm.
Are those things connected? Does it match your child's or your children's ideas about what they're clamoring for? Are we in sync? Are we congruent? And that's
Yeah,
the analysis and that work that we have to do.
yeah.
I use the infancy narrative a lot because again, especially if kids are nursing, it's very common that
Mhm.
that baby, 0 to 6, 0 to 12, 0 to 18 months, there's a connection there because it's literally sustenance. Like there's a literal thing here. So
Mhm.
if you believe that your role is supposed to be lead, I'm gonna do X, Y, Z. Well, that's an incongruence there because that might not be what the child wants. That might not be what the mother wants, and that might not be what either of them need.
Need, yeah, yeah.
So what can you do to contribute in that way? And how do you reconcile your own ideas and expectations about what you should be doing versus what you are doing?
I have so much respect for two things that I hear coming from you. I hear knowledge, what you know, but then I also hear wisdom that cannot be, is not learned in the same way that knowledge is learned. And I appreciate
Mm,
that. I respect that. We've talked a little bit about the intersection of Black identity and
yeah.
fatherhood, but is there
Mhm.
anything else you'd want to say about that?
Yes, because it adds, and this is directly coming from the research that I'm conducting right now. Everything that affects, and we're talking about black men in this moment, but black folks in general, but black men, all those things that are unique about what it means to be black in this world, in this country, none of that goes away. And that's the thing that we
Mhm.
have to remember as clinicians. All those concerns about isms and masculinity, all that stuff, everything is still there on top of
Mhm.
everything that we have been talking about now. And sometimes those intersect in very unique ways. I'm thinking about a father who shared a story with me where he was, this is in New York City. He's got God, his daughter must have been 3 or no, must have been younger than that because she was still in a stroller. So he's sharing this story. And I'll also provide context. Again, this idea of blackness not going anywhere. He's a big black man. Like my homie's like 6'2", and he's fit and he's a brother. He's got locks. So that's my guy. He's walking through the city pushing his daughter in the stroller, and a small dog comes off leash and bites him in the ankle. And in that moment, he's got multiple things going through his mind. And I share this story because specifically this talks about the intersection of blackness. Number one, what the hell just happened? Like something just hurt me, right? That's not good. Now he looks over and sees this tiny dog, I don't know what the breed was, and a white woman sort of chasing after the dog. He's thinking about his daughter. How do I make sure that she's safe in this moment? Is she safe? Okay, good. Now he's thinking about himself as well. Okay, what do I need to do to rectify this situation? There's a small dog biting me. It hurts. It's not the end of the world. Da, da, da. And then you've got this white woman who is
Mm-hmm.
engaging with him and starts minimizing the experience, where he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
you got to get your dog. And she's like, oh, it's fine. And
Mm-hmm.
here's the burden in this moment. He shared this. We talked about this for actually multiple weeks. As much as he wants to yell, shout, he can't. Because the idea of him yelling, big black man, yelling at a
It's going
small
to,
white woman with a tiny dog, the
is
threat
going,
there. So that threat, that fear of of lacking safety in that
safety.
moment,
Mm-hmm.
that's not just parenthood, that's black parenthood. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to think about that at all times. Folks have talked so many times about when your kids get older, talking about how do you engage with the police. That's black parenthood right
Mm-hmm.
there. So those narratives and everything that intersects with it are
Mm-hmm.
unique to black fathers and black parents. How do I
Mm-hmm.
teach my child what it means to have this skin and to navigate in this world? How do I keep them safe when I'm having emotional experiences? And I know that there's risk to having those emotional experiences. And maybe absent being a father in this moment, I would take that risk because it might be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, maybe in a different
Mm-hmm.
situation, he'd yell at that white woman, like, get your dog. Like, no, this is,
Mm-hmm.
but my kid is here. And I risk that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that
Mm-hmm.
intersection doesn't go away. So anyone who knows anything about what it means to counsel folks of color, to counsel black folks,
Mm-hmm.
all those considerations, you have to
Mm-hmm.
intersect them and layer them on top of everything that we've talked about over these last couple of minutes about parenthood
Mm-hmm.
and fatherhood, because they do not go away. They are present, they are relevant, and they make unique situations that that just would not exist if that
Yeah.
intersection didn't occur.
There's for a first-time father, there's a new identity added in with all of the
Yes.
other identities that he holds.
Yes.
And I would imagine, I would say that with each child, because for a mom, with each child,
Mhm.
the identity of motherhood is still there, or fatherhood in case of men is still there. But now I'm the parent of one, the parent of two, the parent of
Mhm.
three. Life changes
Yeah.
with every addition to the family. And it makes total sense to me what you're saying about paying close attention, not being dismissive about the intersection of this new identity, especially for first-time fathers, or even the identity of a father who's trying.
Yes.
That's an identity.
Yeah.
It may not
And we
be a
didn't talk
public
much about it.
identity because
Yeah.
you don't say, "Hey, we're trying to make a baby over here."
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
him,
Oh yeah.
an identity
Mhm.
in his relationship.
Yeah,
It's
we didn't talk much about trying, but the trying process is something that I've talked to a lot about clients about what that means for you when you're carrying who you are into this position of, well, here's the thing that I thought that would
mhm,
just happen or that I can do. And in some ways it's tied to who I am. Again,
yeah.
ideas about masculinity, fertility, all of that. And what does it mean if that's not my reality? And you mentioned something else that made me think, and I'll personalize it. I have two children. I have a daughter, I have a son. My daughter is older, and what it meant for me to father a daughter, and both me and my wife are both mixed race. So my daughter came out lighter than both my wife and I. So I have a lighter skinned daughter and I have a darker skinned son. My son came out darker than both my wife and I. All of those fatherhood dynamics
Mhm,
are there and they're
mhm,
different, right? So
mhm,
I have a son who is darker skinned than I am and my wife is. And I'm already
mhm.
thinking, okay, how do I teach this boy?
How do I keep him? How do I protect him? How do I help him stay
Yes.
safe?
Yeah. And I'll also add, I have a daughter who is lighter than I am. And there have been times, and this thought till this day, it still sometimes pops up, especially with my mother. My mother is my father is white, my mother is black. My mother is much closer to your complexion than anything else. And she's got this very light-skinned granddaughter who she picks up from school sometimes, and it's like,
Mhm.
that's your grandma?
Is that your grandmother?
Yeah. And the
Or is
idea
that
of
your
me,
nanny? Or
she
is that your
and she's
the,
gotten
the
that. Um,
mm,
and but the idea of me, father, right? There's ideas about who the caretaker is supposed to be. I was always the one doing things. Let me say always. I was often the
mhm,
one doing the things. I'm at the park with her by myself. I'm just a,
mhm, mhm,
but the thought of being questioned, who's that man with
mm,
that
with
very light
that,
baby?
babe,
That's been there.
yeah,
So the dynamics are different for every child, as you were saying, and the intersecting
yeah,
components of race, of identity, of gender, all of these things are
yeah,
ongoing. And it's only
yeah,
if we make the space to talk about them can we start
yeah.
to reconcile them.
And this is tangential, but when you talk about things that we must talk about in families of color, the skin tone ranges as you're describing
Mhm.
can be from, I mean, across the spectrum.
Yeah.
And there is research that talks about how parents often tend, and this is from the child's perspective, tend to parent lighter skin and darker skin children differently. And there are even components around gender. So gender and complexion uh, intersect
Mhm.
in a parent's mind and create different responses.
Yeah.
And that's not the main topic, but I still appreciate you bringing that up because that's another one of those things that's overlooked. We don't
Yeah.
talk about that. It just remains almost this invisible, um, visceral response
Mm.
to certain situations. So thank you for bringing that up. That those are also the kinds of things that we need to talk about when you're talking about parenting at all
Yeah.
with people of color, families
Yeah.
of color. Oh, this is such a rich conversation. I've just got one more closing thought. A question I want to pose to you. Then I'm going to let you just share whatever you'd like to share. Generally speaking, I wish we had more time, but um, I'm going to have you back. I have you back. What recommendations do you have for Black fathers and for those who care about them?
Yeah. And you worded the question perfectly because for me, it's not just you, it's the people who love you, right? It's both of
Mhm.
those things. So for Black fathers and for the people who love them, I think opening dialogues about role and expectation, which we've been talking about a lot, is salient. It's huge.
Mhm.
Being able to ask the question, what do you think your job is going to be as you go through this process? What do you hope to do as you go through this process? Because that expectation might really be significant to them. And sometimes the lack of that expectation, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, is just as significant. Because sometimes folks come in with ideas of, this is who I'm supposed to be. And if it lines out and it works out perfect, then maybe that works out. Awesome, good. And sometimes folks are like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be. I want someone to tell me who I'm supposed to be or what I'm supposed to be. I've never had an experience or seen somebody in this
Yeah,
role, or the people I've seen in this role. It doesn't
I
seem
don't
like what
know.
I want to do. That isn't it. So I don't know who I'm supposed to be or what I'm supposed to be doing. And I want to be clear. I don't think that should exclusively be the partner, in this case, not the mother, the mother's job either to tell them, here's what you're supposed to do. Here's what that's a personal journey that we have to go
Yes,
on. We
yes,
have to do that exploration. So as we ask those questions, we have to find community. And that's hard because not everyone has as much access to community in terms of what it means to develop your own sense of self. But finding folks to connect with, whether it's starting in the community level, whether that's your community center, whether that's your church, whether that's just your homies, whatever that is, starting those dialogues about uh, what has fatherhood been like for you? What do you want to be? What do you want out of your father? What do you hope to be as a father? Or hop into session with a counselor or someone like that to explore these ideas of
mhm,
here's what I think fatherhood is going to be. We can start to open that door and have conversations. Okay, well, that sounds like it could be a possibility. What else do you think fatherhood might be? Those types of questions and those types of dialogues to sort of start to story alternative narratives to what fatherhood is. To and you, I'm sort of paraphrasing what you said, to start to examine those pre-existing identities that are going to bleed their way into that new forming identity of father. We have to look back because whatever we're expecting, whatever we're thinking, it's informed by what we've been through and what we've thought and what we've experienced.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That speaks to a level of self-awareness, self-knowledge, knowing yourself by nature and knowing yourself by nurture, because so many people spend their entire lives trying or identifying who they want to be based on, as you said, someone else in their life. They're hell bent on I am not going to be that person, or
Yeah.
they spend the whole life trying to be somebody, and they miss out on the fact that, man, my child just needs me to be who I am.
Yeah.
I don't need to define myself by trying to be like just like my dad or trying not to be like my dad. I will never
Hmm.
be like my dad. And no matter what, especially when you're trying so hard not to be like someone else, that's
Hmm.
usually who you end up being just like, or the impact of the effect, you end up having the same effect, maybe for a different reason, but that just does not work. And it
Hmm.
speaks to the need for healing. So I think you would agree with this that sometimes when you have dads who are trying or are have already walking in the role, you probably have to spend a good bit of time helping them explore
Hmm.
who they are
Hmm.
so that they can bring their full self authentically into both the relationship with the partner, the mom, and with the children.
That's always the goal, is how do we change the dynamic? How do we exist within the dynamic? Because it's not about the individual. The individual matters. I want to be very clear, but it's
Hmm.
as individual people, sometimes folks are very functional individually.
Hmm.
They work
Hmm.
very well on their own and they come together and it's a hot mess.
Yeah,
And so, how do we both
yeah,
serve ourselves well as individuals, but then serve ourselves as a unit?
as a
And
unit.
that requires work, that requires intentionality.
Yeah.
Um, and I think maybe the last thing, but when you talked about that idea of like, sort of that binary of I know who I'm not going to be, or I will aspire to that person to be that person, even within that, sometimes it's asking ourselves, okay, are there aspects of this thing that I've been trying to not be that are actually useful for me?
Mm,
Like maybe I'm
mm,
gonna cut out
hmm. Hmm.
90% of that thing,
Hmm.
but is there 10% there that actually like, okay, actually I did
Hmm.
experience this and that left a
Yeah,
mark. Because sometimes
yeah,
if we're just avoiding it fully, we're
yeah,
avoiding something that we actually benefited from and learned from and
yeah,
gained from. But the idea of attributing that positive aspect to this negative identity,
yeah.
it's
The
not
all or
it's not
nothing
yeah.
kind of a cognitive distortion. There's nothing good, nothing's redeeming,
Yeah.
and there really is. Yeah, it's
Sometimes,
not.
yeah,
It's never all or nothing.
sometimes there is nothing
Sometimes.
redeeming, but sometimes there is.
Dr. Nadrich, I thank you so much I know you're busy, for taking time to talk to me and to the Multicultural Mindset audience. The conversation has been enriching, enlightening. I'm going to make sure that on the last screen, I put information on how people can consult with you, perhaps.
For sure.
Okay, that would be great. And that they could connect with you on your social media platforms if they desire.
Sure, yeah, yeah. I've got plenty of ways to be
Okay.
contacted. I'm not. My name is unique enough that if you Google me, you'll find me regardless pretty quickly. And this was fun. And somehow we've been talking this long, and my children haven't bust into this room. I'm surprised.
I was kind of hoping they would. I wanted to meet them because they sound absolutely adorable. But maybe that will be next time.
Maybe
Thank you
next time.
so much. Any closing remarks you'd like to offer at all?
No, I think at the core of it, it's, again, when we're talking about fatherhood, we're talking about often existing within a system. And for me, so much of it is trying to foster safety and authenticity within the system. There's a lot of individual work that goes into that, but there's also a lot of collaborative work in terms of
Yeah,
how do we show up as authentically as ourselves, recognizing that it's safe enough, never 100% safe. It's rarely 100% safe. Is it safe enough for me to share this? Is it safe enough for me to share, to show up in this way? So there's a lot of individual work that needs to be done to show up that way, but there's also often also a lot of dynamic work that needs to happen as well.
powerful. You are truly a scholar in this on this topic and in this field, and certainly wish you well in the things that are to come. Dr. Tyce Nadrich, thank you again, and thank you to everyone who has joined in, who's watching, or maybe even watching a re-recording of this. Um, we are the multicultural mindset, and again, I encourage you just keep doing what you're doing with an open mind. A lot of what we were taught in graduate schools, a lot of what we were socialized to accept and to believe, just has to be challenged and scrutinized through a different lens when we're working with people of color. And certainly when we're talking about fatherhood and such issues as we've heard about today, the intersection of Black identity and fatherhood is something that must be taken into consideration when you are in clinical practice, or whether you're an educator, whether you're a pastor, whatever kind of leading or helping that you do. We have to take all these things into consideration. So, thank you again for joining us. Keep practicing with cultural humility, and I will see you next time.
Thanks.